Hello, and welcome to The Things That Don't Change, where we endeavor to view an ever-changing and ever-fluid world through the lens of eternity. I am Thomas Walheim, that is Chris Hayden, and today we want to talk about traditionalism, and some of the things that have gone on within that movement over the last few decades, and kind of what it is, why it's important, but also some of the pitfalls that the devil lays within the movement. So I'll go ahead and say I have wanted to make an episode on traditionalism multiple times, and Chris, I've talked to you several times about how I really want to do an episode on traditionalism or tradition or like something like that. But the problem is that each time I came to you with the topics I was coming up with were very disparate. Like, because I would go through these like benders of like we just need to like return to tradition and like, you know, leave everything else to starve, or I would go through these benders of like, but why are trads so problematic? You know, like, because I very much am a traditionalist. I grew up in the traditional Latin Mass, still attend it to this day with my wife and daughter, and you know, for any of you who have been on our locals community, I always pray my office in according to the 1960 breviary. So I'm used to the older liturgies. Everything else is fine, valid. I love it. It's wonderful. It's beautiful, but it isn't home to me, you know? But at the same time, I recognize that there are some trads that like I look at when they're talking and I'm like, you're giving us a bad name. Like you're the one making it difficult, you know? Because I would say most traditionalists want to be in the church, faithful to the magisterium, but there's just this nagging little thing in some traditionalist groups, which is like we are defiant, and that's our defining characteristic, you know? And so whenever those people speak up, the trads like me are just like, and it feels the same way that we used to always need to explain Pope Francis. Like now I have to explain my traditionalist Christian brethren, you know, and sort of correct what I need to correct and give nuance to what I need to give nuance to, things like that, and it's exhausting. So there are some times where I was like, we need to talk about the problems in the traditionalist movement. There are some times where I was like, we just need to talk about how we need to all be in the traditionalist movement. But the thing about traditionalism is that it is a difficult topic to talk about within the online space, especially because, and this isn't me giving any like deep or profound thought. It is just me being really candid that if you identify yourself as a traditionalist online, then there are going to be two main reactions that you kind of want to avoid. The first is from the people who go, all right, I'm just going to write him off because he's going to say that the Novus Ordo is ugly and invalid and that Vatican II didn't happen or wasn't a binding council or something like that. Like he's one of those like rad trads that's just like wanting to, you know, revolutionize the church over and over again, and that's, you're gonna lose people that way. Then there's the other side of the coin, which is when you identify as a traditionalist, a bunch of the traditionalists go, one of us, and then if you say something that doesn't really align with their particular sub brand of traditionalism, then they go, oh, he's being weak, and you lose people that way. You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah,
I
mean, that's a lot of that's just the internet. You know, there's so many different factions, and we got to define our terms. I guess it's tricky because you say traditionalist, and yeah, that means a million different things with a million different people. But also, on one hand, it's like, well, I mean, that's kind of what we're supposed to do, like be traditional to tradition. I mean, that's
right.
part of the church,
right?
But at the same time, that's distinct from the movement that is called traditionalism, which has a more, you know, Latin Mass or stuff like that. Like,
right.
Not saying those are separate, but those can be two different ways to use the term traditionalist. And
right.
sometimes, depending on who you're talking to, it's like, oh, well, if you're not classifying that person as traditionalist, are you trying to say they're not Catholic? And yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah. So the thing is, when it comes to traditionalism, it's a lot like conservatism in a sense that we talked about this when we were talking about, we did an episode on must a Catholic be a conservative, and the first thing you have to do in that question is, well, what do you mean by conservative? Because in the same way that we would say that, okay, a conservative is someone who's trying to conserve something, and most times when we're talking about a socio-political stance, we're talking about conserving a traditional value of your society. To be an American conservative, like you're trying to preserve the American tradition of value, well, you're going to be you're most of the way there, but these are Protestant values, which are in most ways aligned with Catholic values, but not in all ways. So you're going to have to nuance things. If you say, well, I'm a real conservative, then you're saying, okay, I'm trying to conserve what has always been and always will be. Makes sense, right? But then, as somebody said, I'm from Saudi Arabia and I'm a conservative, we probably think very different things about most things, you know? Like,
Yeah, I mean, it's like talking about being a conservative in the Republican Party versus being a conservative in the British Conservative Party.
right, exactly. And so, um, like, conservative means different things. Similarly, like, I'm a traditionalist, but if I meet a traditionalist Mormon, we don't agree at all, you know? Like, about a lot of very fundamental issues. And there's also the kind of turnoff that a lot of people have to traditionalism that I think it can be oversimplified a lot of the time in people's minds as being the Catholic version of fundamentalism. You know, it's like oh well, these are just
Which isn't really a fair way to describe it because
it,
it's not.
it's
there
almost
there are
there.
fundamentalists
Yes,
in the traditionalist movement,
yes,
but it's not fundamentalism in the sense that, say, a Protestant fundamentalism would be.
right. But I think for a lot of people, they think, oh well, a traditionalist is a Catholic who wants to do the hard version of like they're setting the difficulty level to hard, you know, like
Yeah,
they're Catholics in survival mode, you know, and
sure.
um and and like there was a friend of ours a while ago. I don't even remember who it was or what the context was, but we were in the group chat and he starts saying something that he disagrees with the church on. I think, and he said, "Well, I'm not really like a trad like all of you are." And most people in the group were like, I don't really consider myself a trad actually." And he's like, "Oh, really?" Because like for him, it's just a like, oh, someone who
Yeah,
takes their faith seriously is a trad, you know.
right.
And there's some credence to that. Like I get where that comes from because like if you are at a let's just say like if you go to most Novus Ordos, like if you just say like, oh, I'm going to go to a Novus Ordo, like, and you just go to some random parish, and you pick out a random person and you ask them a catechetical or canonical question, they'll be like, whoa, I don't know, ask the priest, you know. Whereas if you go to most Latin masses, um, intrinsically you're dealing with people who were willing to put in a little bit of homework to be at that mass because they have to like relearn something. They need to learn a different language to some degree, that at least like learn the
Yeah,
responses, and so they're willing to put in the work. They're willing to take the time and effort, and so if you go to a random Latin mass and you pull someone aside and you ask them a catechetical or canonical question, they'll be like, "Yes, so," and they'll give you your like either the actual catechetical answer or their opinion. Um,
yeah,
but and that's the tricky thing is that like that might just be an issue of pride, an issue of ego. Like that for some people it's a matter of okay, well we attend this older, like richer liturgy, and so it's easy. It like you have to be aware of the screw tape all the time. That's like it's easy to get the sense of like, oh well, I really know my Catholicism. Other people don't, you know. Um, and so you might be conflating just what you have always thought with what the church has always taught, you know? Um,
yeah.
but I'm going to give a sort of strange analogy, but actually I think it connects pretty well. Um, so I am gluten intolerant. I have a thing called celiac disease, which means that I can't have things that contain wheat, barley, or rye, essentially, and malt, because that's, barley, and also a lot of the time oats, but that's actually technically an issue of cross contamination. But for all intents and purposes, wheat, barley, rye, oats, and malt, right? And that has become, in the last 20 years, everybody coming up with like a gluten-free menu. Everybody's taking on a gluten-free diet. Like 10 years ago, there was this big push that like everybody was eating gluten-free that didn't need to. And it's like, no, I have to avoid cancer. Like, you're
Yeah.
just doing it because it's fashionable and you think it'll make you healthy. It's like gluten-free food isn't necessarily healthy. Like, if you're eating gluten-free Oreos, you might as well just be eating normal Oreos, you know? Um, but the but the thing is that people will ask you, well, if this is such a thing, then why wasn't it why was nobody gluten intolerant 100 years ago? Like 200 years ago, whatever. Because 200 years ago, gluten as it exists today didn't exist. The plants have mutated because we've treated them with so many things, so many pesticides and stuff. And so it has changed the genetic makeup of the plant. You can't actually make wheat the way that you used to be able to make wheat. And so the plant itself has mutated and my body cannot tolerate it, right? So yeah, a gluten intolerant person wouldn't have existed a few hundred years ago because there really wasn't a thing to be intolerant to. Similarly, traditionalism, very few people identified as traditionalist Catholics back in the day. You were kind of just Catholic. Why? Because, well, there's only one mass. And there's only, like, all of us go through the same catechetical process, and we all have, there was a lot more uniformity. And so if someone was a traditionalist, they meant something else than what they mean now. You know? It's like they were going to the Catholic Mass and learning the Catholic Catechism, and there are several catechisms, but they don't contradict each other. And so, like, yeah, there was a lot more uniformity. No one was like a traditionalist Catholic. They may be a traditionalist and a Catholic, but there was a little less factioning at the time. Whereas now, when someone says a traditionalist, they can mean several things, and unfortunately do mean several things. But largely that came about with the Second Vatican Council and the promulgation of the 1970 Missal and the new Breviary, and so, like, this new Mass comes along, this new Liturgy of the Hours comes along, and now we're using the vernacular more than we're using the sacred languages. We have a new catechism that just dropped, and so we're using this new catechism. It says not contradictory things, but different things than other catechisms used to say, you know, and so all of a sudden there's this feeling among a lot of Catholics who really loved the way that Catholicism was, that feels like, oh, we're losing it, like we're losing what we have. We are losing our culture. We're losing our values. We're losing, like, a lot of different things, and so the traditionalist movement as it exists today stems out of that. It's a reaction to a lot of the things that we had for a very long time being either lost or subdued or suppressed in some way, right? So, so that being said, I'm not going to exhaust myself trying to define all the different types of trad. Because every definition I will give is going to be disagreed with by some trads.
Well, what does Reddit tell me? We got the glad trads, we got the mad trads, we got the rad trads.
Yeah, as long as it rhymes, it can be a thing.
Right.
So I'm
The
just
dad
going
trads.
to, yeah. So I'm not going to. Is that a thing? Dad trads?
I don't know. I just made it up. It's a thing now.
Good. So I'm going to, rather than try to say, like, oh, this is what a rad trad is, this is what a glad trad is, all these different things, I'm just going to describe, like, three different groups of people. We have the traditionalists who say that it is traditional things only. We do not allow new things. Like, I'm a traditional, I'm a fundamental traditionalist. Like, I want only old things, right? That's the one type of traditionalist. There's the other type of traditionalists, second type, that just says, I just love traditional things. Like, I that doesn't mean I anathematize anything that's new. I love the traditional things. That's kind of where I would throw myself if I had to categorize myself. Um, is just that I just love tradition. Like the tradition of the church is beautiful, and I find it to be my home and where I thrive most spiritually. And then there's the third group, which is systematically our default setting should be the traditional thing, which I think is perfectly reasonable. It's like that doesn't preclude any new things or new developments from coming in. It just means that by default we do what we have done. You know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, because I mean, you gotta, in some way, shape, or form, keep the door open to innovation's a tricky term, but like,
Development.
and development, yeah, because like, I mean, let's face it, how many, I don't know the answer to this, but how many little rituals that were part of, say, the post Tridentine Mass, came apart, were new at some point.
Right.
I don't know the answer to that question, but like doing, I don't know, prayers at the foot of the altar. When did that come into play?
Right.
Doing this. When did that come into play? I don't know. Like at some point that was new.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
So if you look at the actual documents on the liturgy from the Second Vatican Council, for instance, the things that they required to be changed are very few compared to the things that did change. And
Yeah.
and so like, for instance, it said that Latin should still have pride of place. The only thing that said we should use the vernacular for, and I'm not saying that this was disobedient of the church to make a vernacular mass, because it said it's up to the local ordinaries how much the vernacular is used. And all around the world, people went, oh, so the entire mass, cool.
But doesn't Missale Romanum of 1969 even say that?
Yes, it does. And and so like they did give that allowance, but the one thing that they said this actually needs to be in the native languages was the readings, because they were realizing, hey, in this particular time in Christian history, too many of our faithful are biblically illiterate. Like it's a stereotype for a reason. And luckily, and by the grace of God, it's a stereotype that is kind of starting to go away, because so many Catholics actually have really invested themselves in Scripture. But if your average Protestant service at the time, let's say like the 1960s, is a guy who is reading a few verses and delivering this message for like an hour or two, then those verses are going to stick in your head,
Yeah.
Whereas if the average Catholic at the time, there were some churches in which the readings would be done in Latin, and then before the homily, the priest would read them again in English, or whatever the vernacular was in that particular region.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of churches in which the priest just reads them in Latin, and then he goes and does his homily. You don't know what he just said, because you don't really speak Latin.
I've been to Latin masses that have done either of those options.
Right.
And
there are some that the priest would just say, okay, I'm going to read in English the reading that is pertinent to my homily.
Right. I've also seen that.
And so like that was a small development. Let's put the readings in the vernacular, and also let's add a reading, because we're realizing that up to this point we've only had New Testament readings. If we're trying to focus on the biblical literacy of the faithful, we need to include the Old Testament. Totally reasonable. Before the 1970 missal came along, the 1960, we're going to ignore the 1965 missal for a second.
Everyone always does.
Everybody always does, and for a reason. It, like, for all intents and purposes, didn't exist. So the 1962 missal was how...
I don't appreciate this anti-1965 slander here.
So the 1962 missal was the book that codified how the Mass is said. But before that, there was the 1950 missal, I think it was, or maybe it was 55. Like, before that, like, there were many iterations.
55 had the Holy Week revisions of 55.
Right. And before that, there was the development of So yeah, they changed how the Triduum was done in the previous iteration. Before that, they said, okay, we're going to add Joseph to the canon, and that is said during the Mass. Before that, they added some prayers requested by the Pope to be said after Low Mass by the faithful in the vernacular. Before that, they were like, there are all these developments. Like, it's not a matter of the Latin Mass as you would go to it today is the way that the Mass was prayed in the catacombs. You know, like it has the
Yeah,
same
because it was in Greek.
roots. Yeah, true, but like that's the root of the Mass. But then it developed over 1,500 years until eventually the Protestant Reformation happens, and so like 1517, Luther starts marshaling a bunch of rebels that all develop into their own factions that are all leaving the church and starting their own churches because, well, who's to say that I can't be as much of an authority as the priest or the bishop or the pope? And so they start making their own factions and they start making their own liturgies, which are tweaked versions of the Catholic liturgy. And so what does the pope have to do? He has to say, all right, we need to define clearly for the faithful, just so that there can be no confusion, what is the liturgy of the Catholic Church, so it can be recognized. And so we have the Council of Trent. And the Council of Trent, one, clarifies a bunch of teachings, but two, it gives us the Tridentine Mass, which is not a new Mass. It is a codifying of something that already existed in Rome. Like, this is how the Mass is done here, and so this is the default liturgy of the Mass. And it was the first time in the history of the church in which they said, all right, here's the default setting of how you say the Mass. There were a bunch of other liturgies within Catholicism, but we have a bunch of new liturgies popping up recently, and so we have to make a rule. What's the rule? Any liturgy that is younger than 200 years old should not be said. And so the Dominican liturgy, yeah, you can do that. That started in like, I don't know, the 11th century, 10th century. You can still do that. The Ambrosian rite, you can still do that.
Yep. It's Arabic.
Yeah, the Maronite liturgy, go for it. Like, there are a bunch of liturgies that have existed way longer than 200 years, whereas there are some orders that, yeah, their liturgy was really new, and so okay, well, we're just going to have to adhere to this new missal that has been codified from Rome, that this is the default of how the Mass is said. And most of the liturgies, you can say unfortunately or you can say fortunately, depending on how you look at it, most of the liturgies that existed that weren't the missal that we all know, just sort of said, well, it's just easier to just be uniform with how the rest of the church is doing it, and so they just stopped doing them, right? That just sort of fizzled out. So that is where the Tridentine Mass comes into play. This is the first real codified, this is how the church as a whole does the Catholic Mass. And then there are a bunch of developments after that. That, all right, we're tweaking this, we're changing that wording, we're doing it, but it was like very gradual along the way over 500 years. And then the Novus Ordo comes about, and it is, to the average onlooker, they're looking at this and going, okay, there might have been some developments a few years ago to the Mass. We added Joseph. Like, we added Et Joseph to the Mass. That's a development. But now the priest, we've removed the paintings and the statues. No, I'm talking about a bunch of stuff that was not required by the church. This is just stuff that happened.
Yeah, that's not even part of the Mass. That's just what they're doing around it.
But even in the Mass, ignore the trappings around the church. You
Eucharistic prayers now.
Yeah. You have several Eucharistic prayers, several prayers of consecration. You have 4 options.
We have the dew fall.
Yeah, you have the dew fall. But yeah, you have, but you've gotten rid of the altar rails. Even churches that didn't get rid of the altar rails, well, there was no longer a need for the altar rail because people weren't using it in the liturgy. The priest is now facing us instead of facing the tabernacle. It's all in our own language rather than being in Latin. The prayers at the foot of the altar no longer exist. There are a bunch of things that's just like, oh, this seems like a completely different thing. It's not completely different, but it's more different than people are used to, you know? And so it does seem like a grand departure from what we've done up until this point. So if we're going to talk about traditionalism, we need to talk about, like, why is tradition actually important? You know? Like, in the church, we talk about how, our Protestant brethren will say things like sola scriptura, which for most Protestants just means we take Scripture really seriously as an infallible source. Correct. However, that's not what sola scriptura means. Sola scriptura means Scripture is the only infallible source, only
Yeah.
infallible authority. Whereas we say, yeah, no, there's Scripture, there is the magisterium of apostles, and there is tradition, sacred tradition. As Paul says, that you hold fast to the traditions handed down to you, because Paul is saying this to a group of people that the only Scripture they have, other than the Old Testament, is that letter that he's saying it in right now. So what do they have? They have the
Right.
tradition
And
handed down
it's
to them, and they have the magisterium. They have bishops, you know?
right. And it isn't even scripture TM, it's just the authoritative teaching of the apostle who started their church.
Right. Like, it will be defined as Scripture later. Like, give it 300 years. We'll get around to it. But yeah, like, up until that point, this is just a letter that we received from some guy. So why is it binding? Why is it authoritative? Because one, he's an apostle, he's a bishop, and two, because this is the tradition handed down to us. And so
Yep.
Scripture is saying in these two things, hey, because I am a bishop, I'm handing down this instruction to you, that you, and that's an authoritative statement from me, that you must adhere to the traditions handed down to you. And so that is why we, like, cut and dry, that is why we consider tradition important within Catholicism, is because we are bound to. Like, it is one of the infallible sources, is sacred tradition. For those who are unfamiliar, we do have to make one delineating line here, which is there's sacred tradition, which is the structure of the Mass, the dogmas handed down to us throughout the annals of history by the magisterium. There are the papal writings. There's the church fathers, things like that. That's sacred tradition, right? Then there's tradition, lowercase t, tradition, not an infallible source, which is things like, every year my church does a hoagie sale around the Super Bowl to raise
Yeah.
funds.
Bingo night.
Yeah, bingo night. That's a tradition. Your parish can have a tradition. It's actually good for your parish to have a tradition. It's not a tradition the way that a tradition of the church would be a tradition, but, like, that is a tradition. But let's give a slightly more charitable example than the hoagie sale. So there's a tradition, for instance. Oh, I hear the ice cream truck going by your house. You gotta get some ice cream. So so in any case, there is a tradition, for instance, that as you are praying either the sorrowful mysteries of the Rosary or the Way of the Cross, once you get to the part where Christ is crucified and dies, once you get to the death of Christ, you kneel for that decade or for those prayers, for that particular mystery, for that particular station of the cross. That is a tradition. Is it a sacred tradition? No, we're not bound to it. No one's bound to do that. It is a thing that a group of people within the church started doing, and it caught on. And is it good? Yeah, sure. Is it binding? No. Plenty of people can't kneel. Like, to give a more poignant example, you have within the Latin Mass, there are very few rubrics for the laity. The rubrics are really for the people in the sanctuary, like the priest, the deacon, the subdeacon, the servers. And so those are the rubrics of, like, here's how the Mass has to be said, and here are the postures, and here's when he speaks in a low voice, here's when he speaks in a loud voice, here's when he sings, things like that. Whereas going to a Mass in one TLM parish, TLM being the traditional Latin Mass, um, in one TLM parish, oh, well, everybody stands for this part. You go to another TLM parish, everybody kneels for this part. And that's
Yeah.
because you actually don't really have rubrics for that. All you have is local convention. So you have a lowercase t tradition of here is how we have done that part for a long time. So maybe everybody kneels during the Our Father, maybe everybody stands during the Our Father. Maybe everybody kneels throughout the entire Mass. Maybe people stand at certain parts. It's kind of local convention. Like, we don't really have a codified sacred tradition answer. We just have the tradition of the people. Like, how is it normally done according to how you're used to it, you know?
Right.
So that's why tradition is important in an official way. To put it in more personal terms, Christoph, if you, his name isn't actually Christoph, I just call him that sometimes. So, Christoph, if you woke up this morning and you had absolutely no memory, if you were an amnesiac, if you were Terry Bauer in season 1 of 24, like that one inconvenient, we have to have her in the episode according to her contract, we have nowhere to put her, so we're just going to give her amnesia. So you have amnesia, you have no memory of who you are. How are you going to find out who you are?
Um, well, I guess it depends on where I am. I mean,
Yeah.
look around my surroundings,
Yeah. Yeah,
documentation,
you can deduce
people.
you can deduce some things by your surroundings, by like what is around
Yep.
you. Okay, I'm clearly into these things, but ultimately, looking at those isn't telling you who you are, it's telling you who you were before you woke up with no memory. To know who you are, you have to know who you were, you know?
Yeah.
Like otherwise you just adopt a new identity and say this is who I am now, right? And so, if we want to know who we are as a church, we need to know who we were as a church for the last 2,000 years. We need to go back more than 2,000 years. We need to go back into Judaism and say, who were we then? Like, this is the full heritage that we have that has given us our identity now. If you have no memory of who you are, which is how a lot of traditionalists feel about the church, is that we lost a sense of who we are as a church because we had these large departures, some that were mandated by Holy Mother the Church, and most of which that were just and that's just what happened at the time because it was the 70s,
Yeah.
and everyone wanted to change a bunch of things, and we gave them an inch, they took a mile, you know,
Yeah.
and so like Pope Benedict was part of the Second Vatican Council, and he talked back when he was still Cardinal Ratzinger. He talked about how, because like we had Pope John Paul II, who was the evangelist. Pope Benedict was the theologian, which is funny because he wouldn't describe himself that way, because he thinks of theologian as being the like, I'm argumentative, like I'm making arguments and proofs, whereas he didn't really demonstrate things in a sense of, okay, now we're going to do what Aquinas did to say, well, here's the argument and here's the rebuttal, right? He just monstrated things. He just showed the truth. He just told you what it was,
Yeah.
and didn't feel the need to defend it. It was a release the truth and it will defend itself. But he was such a grand theological mind. And he was talking about the Second Vatican Council, and he said that everything that they said in the Second Vatican Council was correct, but it may have been imprudent to do it when they did it. Like what he said, because I'm paraphrasing, I'm extrapolating. What he essentially said was that they weren't cautious enough to think of how it would be applied at that point in history. It's like we're saying a bunch of correct things that just aren't the thing that needs to be heard right now in some ways. Some ways it totally does. Other ways, all right, yeah, that was a doozy. Because we're giving an inch when people are asking for 8 miles, you know? In any case, going back to what I was saying before, if you have no memory of who you are as a church, then what do? You say, well, who were we before this? You know? And how can we revive that? How can we keep that alive? And there have been some efforts that have been absolutely brilliant in that regard. And there are some efforts that have been really precarious or outright schismatic. I'm sorry, I'm not going to become one of those guys who says schismatic. It's schismatic. I don't even know if that's correct. I don't like the pronunciation
No,
schismatic.
it objectively is.
Yeah,
Schismatic.
yeah. Because according to all European languages, this is either going to be schismatic or it's going to be schismatic. And I can't say schismatic. No one's ever said that before. So, in any case,
Yeah. No one should say that.
yeah.
Ever.
So, um, let's define terms again. So we have schism and apostasy. Apostasy, for the sake of this conversation at least, apostasy is when you break from the church, right? It's when you say, I am abandoning my faith, my religion, my church. Schism is when you do that with a bishop or with some sort of official. Yeah. It is you take church officials with you, and you as a group, leave the church. Here's the thing. If you are an ordained priest, and you leave the church, can you still technically offer valid sacraments? Yeah. If you're excommunicated, yeah, you can. Like, if you are laicized and you're taken out of public ministry and they say you are not allowed to publicly perform these sacraments, can you perform those sacraments? Well, you can, but you should not. You are a priest forever according to the line of Melchizedek. That cannot be undone. And so, laicized priests who want to stay within the communion of the church are told that you can only offer the sacraments when there's an extreme need, essentially. When there is no unlaicized priest who is available. And so if someone is in a car accident and they need last rites, you can give them last rites. You are a priest forever according to the line of Melchizedek. But can you start a church? No, because then you're just doing that not under a bishop, which means you're not in communion, right?
Yeah.
So if a priest says, I'm going to go start my own community, and he has valid holy orders, then that's a schism. If a bishop says, I'm going to go start my own church, my own community, and leaves the church, that's schism because he can make other bishops. Should he? No. Should he ordain priests without the consent of Rome? No. But can he? Yeah, he's an apostle. He can do what he wants. And that's where a lot of the problems stem, and that's why you have to hold bishops to an insanely high standard. But you have some people that outright just say, I'm leaving the church and we're starting another church. That's pretty rare. Most of the time what you have is somebody who says, I need to preserve the truest expression of the faith. And that's a good thing. That's a good motivation. I have to preserve the truest expression of the faith. And then when Rome says, hey, stop, they go, no, I have to preserve the truest expression of the faith, even if it means defiance to the authorities of the church.
Right.
And it's a very easy pitfall to fall into, where it's like, and this is, I think the grandest trap that the devil lays for traditionalists. In the same way that for the charismatics, it's an easy trap for the devil to lay out that say like, all right, if I can make this all about emotionality, then I can make you feel like if you didn't get anything emotional out of this prayer, then you are spiritually dry. And so you have to push for something to feel something every time. And that's the easiest trap that you can set for the charismatics. For the traditionalists, it is hey, you're trying to preserve the faith, the traditions of the faith. Good for you. You have to do that at all costs. And so once your bishop says, hey, you can't do this anymore, and you go, all right, well, we're just going to go underground. Nobody tell the bishop. Now That's how schism happens. Once the Pope says, hey, stop making new bishops and continuing your community by yourself in defiance of Rome, and you say no, then you get excommunicated, and that's how schism happens. Oh my gosh, I'm doing it again. Schism, whatever.
Dude, why'd you say
It's
that weird
it's
word?
it's the same word. People just pronounce it different ways. There's no right or wrong. Just pick one and run with it.
No, there's the right way and there's the wrong way. There's schism and then there's the wrong way.
So, um, so the most famous of the traditionalist groups that broke off is the SSPX. The Society of Saint Pius the Tenth is the SSPX, and they were when the Second Vatican Council adjourned, and then Missale Romanum came out following the Second Vatican Council promulgating the new missal. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre said, "Oh, I think this is going to be like really harmful to the church to have this like complete um, dumping of the old liturgy. This like for it to be completely abandoned for this new thing." And so he started a community in which he started training up these priests, ordaining these priests to continue in the old rite of the church. And to be clear, he was allowed to do that. That's fine. There was nothing that said you can't. And he was actually, if I remember correctly, and fact check this for yourself, if I remember correctly, he was actually given permission by the Pope to do that at the time. And but then what was tricky is that he started saying, "I don't think that this movement is going to survive once I die." And so he's like, "I need to make new bishops to follow me in this for the society." And so he started anointing new bishops, which he can technically do, but you're supposed to do it with the permission of Rome, and Rome said, "Hey, don't do that yet. Let us think through it a little bit first." And
What's the thing? Wasn't he in conversations with Cardinal Ratzinger about
he was, and so there's a the exchange essentially was that Rome told him, "Hey, hang on, we need to check into that and think about it for a little while first." And he went, "No, I need to do this because this is what is needed for this society to survive, and therefore for the liturgy to survive." And so Rome said, "Hey, Archbishop Marcel, we appreciate your fervor and everything, but if you are going to anoint bishops after Rome told you not to, then that is direct defiance of authority. So either recant or we'll have to excommunicate you." And he said no, and he anointed those bishops. And this is like a very simplified version of history, just for the sake of this conversation. But he said no and went ahead and anointed the bishops, and so he was excommunicated for it. If memory serves, and I haven't looked into this for a while because I've never been part of the SSPX, never attended one of their liturgies, and never really looked into their history in any large degree because it just doesn't affect me. But if memory serves, he actually, when he died, he was brought back into communion with Rome. But the bishops he anointed were not. And so they are still excommunicated. They are still in schism. And there's this whole big question. They're in the same position that the Orthodox are, basically, where it's like, okay, you have valid bishops, and therefore you have valid priests, and therefore, arguably, you have valid sacraments. And so but you are in defiance of Rome. The latest, because they've been in talks with Rome for a long time, the SSPX. When Archbishop Lefebvre was excommunicated that day, a bunch of people from the SSPX went to the Pope and said, "Hey, we weren't really cool with him doing that, and so we'd like to form our own society that does the same thing, but with a fanatical devotion to the Pope." And because if we are traditionalists, the most traditional thing is submission to Rome. And
Right.
and so they formed the FSSP, the Fraternal Society of St. Peter. And these groups, unfortunately, are frequently mixed up with each other because they have somewhat similar sounding acronyms.
Yeah.
It would have been great if we had like the SSPX and they said like, "Oh, we're going to make a new society. What are you going to name your society?" ATST, like just something
Yeah.
that sounds
It gets
completely
even more
different.
confusing
Yeah.
because on the Wikipedia page for Marcel Lefebvre, it says that he was part of the FSSPX. I guess the Fraternal Society of St. Pius X.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like
I don't know where that comes
yeah.
from,
So that
but
makes
it's
it
even
even
more
more
confusing.
confusing. But the FSSP is completely in communion with Rome, always has been, and by the grace of God, hopefully always will be. But they have an absolutely fanatical devotion to Rome and the authority of the church. Um, the SSPX has been in talks with Rome for a while, and the last thing that we heard from Rome officially is that they are in a, quote, state of canonical irregularity.
Yeah,
What does that mean?
that's a tough one.
No one knows. And
Yeah.
that's why it's really tricky, is because, all right, so I'm going to give the best argument for the SSPX and the best argument against the SSPX that I can. Specifically for, do they have valid sacraments? Because no matter how much you love your group or love your society or community or whatever it is, if you guys don't have valid sacraments, what are you doing, right? So that's like kind of the big question, and then the second big question is, and are you in communion with Rome? Because like if you are not in communion with Rome, but you can plead ignorance, you didn't think you were not in communion with Rome, and yet you were getting valid confession and Eucharist and marriages and things like that. Great, like, and so best argument I can make, very simple, is that the SSPX is in the same boat as the Orthodox. They had valid bishops who continued this society with this liturgy, and they kept making valid priests. If you have valid bishops and you have valid priests, you have valid sacraments, right? That being said, what do we, if we're trying to be Catholic, have to do? Is we have to say, okay, these are valid sacraments, and has Rome approved them? Like, is Rome okay with this? Because otherwise, like, you are allowed to attend an Orthodox church, for instance, and receive the sacraments there if there are no Catholic sacraments available. And so, like, all right, that's where the SSPX would fall, all other things being equal. So what does Rome say about the SSPX sacraments? Well, Rome has spoken on 3 of them. They are allowed to witness marriages. They can validly absolve sin. That's a big one. Like, if this were 2020 and the churches were closed down and the churches near me weren't offering confession and then the SSPX church was, I would be knocking down that door. Like, please hear my confession. Like, Rome said you can absolve sin. Hot diggity dog, I got sins,
Yeah.
And so they said they could witness marriages, that they can absolve sin. And when it comes to the Mass, this one's tricky. Did they say you have a valid Mass? Yes and no. What they said was that if the Catholic faithful are unable to attend a Catholic liturgy, then attending an SSPX liturgy fulfills their Sunday obligation. Which sounds like this is a valid Mass. But here's the thing. If you can't attend a Catholic Mass, you know what else fulfills your Sunday obligation? Praying a rosary. Like praying with your family at home. Because the Mass is unavailable, but we had to keep the Lord's Day holy. Okay, we need to keep the Lord's Day holy in some way. Like, that could just mean, yeah, if you're unable to attend a Catholic Mass, then here are some people you can pray with. And yeah, that fulfills your Sunday obligation, because there's the liturgical obligation that you have to witness the Mass, and then there's the mitzvah. There's the commandment of keep holy the Lord's Day. That's the commandment obligation. So yeah, you're fulfilling the commandment obligation if you're praying with anybody, if the Mass is not available. And so that's where it gets...
But isn't it not saying, well, in that case, wouldn't it be not that a Mass isn't available, it's just that a Mass in full communion wouldn't be available, so this irregularity would suffice.
Well,
so you would still be compelled to go somewhere then.
It's tricky.
Same thing because it's the same thing with an Orthodox church, right?
Right. But that's the thing, is that the language is ever so slightly different. And it's one of those things of like, all right, how would a lawyer read this? Like, here's the thing.
Well, I'm not a canon lawyer,
exactly,
so
and that's actually the next point I want to get to, is that we're going about these conversations with a like, how would lawyers read what these people have said, what these authorities have said? The average person is not a canon lawyer. They're just trying to do the best they can do. And that's kind of where I want to go from this. But the language with the Orthodox is essentially saying that 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 their sacraments are valid and you can avail yourself to their sacraments if the Catholic sacraments are not available. The language with the SSPX is essentially saying that if the Catholic Mass is not available, then this is a way in which you can fulfill your Sunday obligation, which is slightly different because that could mean
feels
two
the same
different things.
to me, but again,
It
I'm not
does.
educated.
That's what I'm
but
saying.
to me, it would be the same.
It is
so
slightly different, but kind of feels the same and could be argued to be the same. And since we haven't really gotten
sure, but
clarification,
if I was in the situation, I wouldn't care about the argument as much as I just think, okay, then I'll just go to that mass.
right? And that's the thing, is that like a lot of the things we get about the SSPX are shrouded in obfuscation. Like it is really vague or really unclear exactly what they meant. It could be interpreted either way, which might actually be intentional, because
It probably is.
It probably is
You know,
intentional,
'cause
because
you're trying to keep them,
Right.
in a position where they'll be willing to stay in talks,
Right.
but at the same time, you can't say that they're doing. You're not ready to say that they're in full communion
Yeah.
yet because they're not quite there yet.
yeah. So let's take a moment to talk about the papacy for a second. You and I were talking about this off air a couple days ago. We were talking about the Pope, and we were talking about how people give such little charity to the Pope a lot of the time, because the Pope always has to deal with, whenever there's a problem happening somewhere in the church, the Pope has to figure out, how am I handling this problem? But particularly nowadays, where everything is so global and so globally accessible, anything that the Pope addresses for one particular group of people is going to be interpreted as so are we doing that all over the church now? And so you have to look at things, one, through the needs of these particular groups, but also, and how does that affect the view of this tradition throughout the entire world? And so, for instance, there was, during the Francis pontificate, there was this question of, I don't remember where in Latin America, but there's somewhere in Latin America that there are still many areas of Latin America in which, like, you cannot access sacraments because you live too remotely. You're up in a mountain community.
The Amazon, I think.
I think it was in the Amazon, yeah. But essentially, there are so many places within Latin America in which, like, you will get a priest once every 2 years, and you just go, oh my gosh, we have a priest for a week. We need to get everybody go through confession. We need to get everybody married who wants to get married. We got to do everything, because we only have the priest for a short period of time. And so in that case, what do you do? Do you say, okay, well, we can't really allocate more. We can't just, like, send more Jesuits there all the time. We can't just say, like, okay, we're just going to allocate more priests. And so the question came up, all right, well, we could have valid sacraments here if Rome would allow for a few of the married men who are very faithful to the church to become priests. And therefore, they could hear confessions. They could offer the mass. Like they're good, holy men. Could we maybe open that up? And the answer is, yes, we can, but ought we is a different question. And so, because that is an externality of the church. It is not a binding tradition. It's a tradition within our particular rite, and one other rite within Catholicism, is that, the priests are celibate. And so Francis has to deal with the problem, and I don't envy him. He has to deal with the conundrum of, okay, I can give these people valid sacraments. Great. But at the cost of, if I do that, there are probably going to be a lot of other places within the church that go, well, you allowed the guys in the Amazon to be married priests. Why can't we have married priests? That's a double standard, And that's a really tricky thing, is that you're trying to deal with global issues. If you're dealing with something like the SSPX, there's a lot in the balance, And so you're going to give nuggets that say, like, and nuggets that are very particularly vague, because let's say, for instance, that they are in communion with Rome and their sacraments are valid. So there's no reason why you shouldn't attend, right? And that's the problem. There's no reason why you shouldn't attend. Everyone's going to go to the SSPX. All the trads are going to be like, oh, great, the doors are open, because oh well, here's where they're like preserving everything really really well, and they have such a fervor and excitement, and so like yeah, I want to go over there. So you don't want to open the door too much, but also, well, I have a lot of people here who are trying to like really striving to live out the Catholic faith. Am I going to deny them sacraments? No. Like that seems like a rough lot for them. They're trying to live a Catholic life, and I don't want them to not be able to absolve sin, not be able to get absolution for their sins. I don't want them to not be able to receive the Eucharist. And so I'm going to say something that's like a little up to interpretation, you know? Because then arguments can be made for no, we really should stay away from it, and arguments can also be made for it's still valid. And so for most of the faithful, we're not canon lawyers. If it seems valid to you, maybe, I don't know, you know? And so that's the tricky thing when it comes to groups like the SSPX, is that we in the United States particularly, the United States and France, I think, are the two places where like the traditionalist movement is just like moving forward full
Brazil's
steam.
got something, I think.
What's that?
Brazil's got something like that going on,
Brazil
I
has
think.
something going on with that because they have the largest Catholic population of any country in terms of actual people,
For now.
not in terms of percentage, because that's the Vatican, but that's 100%.
Well.
But in terms of people, yeah, the country with the most Catholics is Brazil, and so there's this, but they've lost a lot of the fervor for it that they used to have, and so now there's that same sort of thing. If we've lost who we are, we need to remember who we were. And so the traditionalist movement is really budding and flourishing there. But there are a few places in which it is. And yet for us, I'm just going to talk about the United States for a second because I'm not Brazilian and I'm not French. So
Go for it. I mean, that's kind of what we do.
yeah. So
It's kind of where we're from, so.
yeah, so within the United States and other places like it, within the United States and other places like it, there's a tendency, like we don't realize how spoiled we are with how many options we have. Particularly, like you and I live in the Northeast. Like my family lives down in the South, and like yeah, there are like 3 or 4 Catholic churches that are all a half hour away from their house, whereas I used to work at a church, and then I would leave home and I would pass 5 other Catholic churches on my route home. Not just like near them, like no, I would physically pass the building. Like we have so many Catholic churches, it's ridiculous. And so we are able to shop around. Particularly our generation, we don't really tend to subscribe to, I don't know if we should, but we don't tend to subscribe to the like regional idea of like, oh, well, I'm within this parish's region and therefore I'm required to attend that parish because I'm within their territory. We don't really tend to go with that as a generation. And so we're able to shop around, say like, well, where do I like the liturgy? I like the liturgy here. Or even if I'm a little more, this liturgy is fine and this liturgy is fine. Well, I like that this parish has such frequent confession times. Or I like that this parish has adoration twice a week. Or like whatever it is. Whereas imagine for a second that there are 2 churches near you. The one church is the priest is always wearing his rainbow stole because I just don't want to, like, I don't want to check out, like, I'm a little checked out. I don't want to look at what is the color I have to wear for the day, so I'm just going to wear the multicolored one because that's all of them. And maybe he puts on a chasuble, maybe he doesn't. But he's just sort of in an alb and a stole, and he's offering a valid mass, but he ad-libs a lot of it. Like it's more of a community thing for him. He considers himself to be more of a community organizer than a priest. He doesn't want to offer confession. It's a drag for him. Like he clearly has stopped praying a long time ago, and during the Our Father, he has everybody come up around the altar and hold hands. And it's like you have that church. And then you have the SSPX chapel. where do you go? What is the responsible thing to do? Well, some really good arguments have been made for how this is a valid mass to attend, and how this might be in communion with Rome, and yeah, I technically have something that I know is in communion with Rome, but he's preaching heresy every Sunday, and I can't access a lot of the sacraments because he doesn't want to do it. And if you have those two churches, personally, I would go to the SSPX in a heartbeat. You know, like,
Yeah.
and I feel like it's easy for us to simplify things, being like Northeastern Catholics and thinking like, oh well, everybody has the same buffet that we have of churches. Like, no, like a lot of people are trying to figure out, hey, either I have to care for my own soul. Where is my soul going to be more cared for? Well, there's this one place. They're in a state of canonical irregularity. That doesn't mean that they are out of communion. They're just in a state of canonical irregularity. But they offer a really wonderful liturgy. The priest is such a good, holy man that really helps me to grow in faith. And when I go to confession with him, he doesn't go, oh, come on, that's not really that serious. He like really walks me through everything, and then he gives me good penance that will really be good for my soul, and he absolves my sins. And then whenever I need something for my marriage, or I'm discerning a vocation or whatever it is, he like wants to sit down with me and say, let's look at this through the lens of God's eyes. You know? Like, yeah. I would 100% go to the SSPX in that case, you know?
Yeah.
And that's one of the tricky things, that like we can't view it as an overly simplistic thing. It almost never is. Like, I personally, unless I had to, would never attend an SSPX chapel, because, well, I have something that I know is in communion, and also I'm able to attend the Latin Mass elsewhere. Like, even if I was an only Latin Mass Catholic, which I'm not, I love any version of the Mass that is promulgated by Holy Mother of the Church. But
I don't even know where the nearest SSPX church is.
I have no idea. Like, I literally could not tell you. Like, I don't even think we have one near us.
Which is crazy, because we live in a very populated area.
Right. But also, our populated area, like, a lot of the time, and I don't have any inside baseball about the SSPX, but I think from what I've heard that they tend to look at population centers that already have access to the Latin Mass, and they say, okay, that's not where we need to prioritize sending people.
Sure.
Which I think is actually a pretty good argument for a spirit of communion. That they're like, oh, well, no, there's already a Catholic Latin Mass there. You know? So we don't need to go there. Like they already got it. It's not like they're saying, oh, well, no, we need our presence there.
Sure.
You know? So, yeah. So that's the best argument I can make for the SSPX, and like why I really can't judge someone for attending an SSPX chapel for the like regular Sunday parish. We do have to look at the other side of things, which is tradition is important. And yeah, these traditionalist groups might have something that, like, they might be onto something. There are also some issues that a lot of people take with traditionalists that aren't entirely invalid. You know? So, like,
yeah,
when I say he's a pretty problematic trad, what do you think I'm saying? Like, what do you presume about this person that I'm talking about?
Problematic trad, advocating for separation from the Pope in some way, or accusing the Pope of certain, you know, sins, or rejection of Vatican II. You know?
Right. Rejection of Vatican II, rejection of the new Mass.
Yeah.
Like, I know a lot of trads. I don't personally know a lot of trads. I think the loudest people are often the minority. Like,
well, sure, the internet always brings them to the forefront.
But even before the internet, the minorities tend to get loud because otherwise they're not heard. If you're the majority, then you don't have to speak loudly to be heard because everyone else is saying the same thing. Like, and so there's a loud minority within the traditionalist movement of people with a, as Francis put it, I believe he used the term, a spirit of either spirit of disunity or a spirit of schism.
Yeah.
And that they have this sort of defiant aspect to their practice of faith. And like I said, that's the easiest trap to lay is I need to preserve the truest expression of the Catholic faith, even to the point of defiance of the Catholic authorities. And they might not even put it in those terms, but it just actually it practically happens that way, where they say,
Mm.
I need to preserve the true fullness of the Catholic faith, and oh well, my bishop read Traditionis Custodes, and he said, okay, I'm disallowing the Latin Mass within my diocese, and so you and a bunch of others convince your priest that like, hey, what if we just do one quietly and we just don't tell the bishop, you know? Well, no, if he specifically disallowed it, then that is disobedience to authority that's put over you. You have a valid mass. You're not losing a sacrament here. Is it sad? Yes. But you do actually have to be obedient to the bishop. When, like, it's one of the things that, like, I always find it funny that, like, the Orthodox called themselves Orthodox because, well, what's the really Orthodox thing? Submission to Rome, unity with Rome, you know? Like, the traditionalists call themselves traditionalists. Um, the rad trads, the radical traditionalists, call themselves radical traditionalists. You know, it's radically traditional submission to Rome. Like, it's a funny, they're funny monikers because of that. But it's like, if I am going to be a traditionalist, I'm not just a liturgical traditionalist. I'm a traditionalist in what has the church taught, what has been handed down to us within the traditions of spirituality, all these different things. So when Traditionis Custodes came out, and the Pope said, no more Latin Mass in parochial churches, in parishes, in diocesan parishes, and the bishop of each diocese can decide one place that is not a parochial church and without erecting a new location as a personal parish where the Latin Mass can continue, but otherwise you're kind of out of luck. That was really sad to me. Like that like you and I were in the Poconos at the time when that dropped, and we were like reading through it, and it felt like such a gut punch. Like it just stabbed me in the heart because this is my home. I've just been evicted. Like, and that's really how it felt. It was I've been spiritually evicted from my home. But, and I'm not saying this is something that like everyone was bound to do. Like this is something that you had to like search your own conscience and decide whether or not you'd have to repent of this. But different people respond to that different ways. I was like, the way that I read this, it seems perfectly clear to me that he is saying no more Latin Mass in the parishes. And so I was really, really sad, but I was like, all right, well, if the Pope says no, you're not going to catch me at one. Like, that makes me really, really sad. Like, genuinely sad. I now feel like a displaced refugee spiritually that, like, yeah, I'm going to the Novus Ordo, and there are some nice Novus Ordos I can go to, and I like them, and they're beautiful, and it's a sacrament of the Eucharist. I'm blessed to be here, but that's not my home. And I've been disallowed from returning to my home in many ways, and that's really sad. But that's how I dealt with it, was like, okay, I'm going to be obedient to the Holy Father, even if it means that I'm really depressed, like, because I'm bound to be, and there are many people within the traditionalist movement throughout the Francis pontificate that got really, really angry with Pope Francis for things that some of them were probably his fault, some of them probably weren't. But he would lend a lot of confusion to the church, even if he didn't intend to. His papacy was a confusing one, and he kept saying things that really seemed like they came off one way, even if he meant it another way. Other times he was an absolute stalwart. No, this is not congruent with the Catholic teaching, you know? No, you cannot
Yeah.
abort your child. That's like hiring a hitman. The no, women cannot become deacons or priests. Like, he was very, no, that's ridiculous. And we're not doing that. Like, but other times it was confusing. And that sparked the ire of a lot of people. And so I think for a lot of people, even though the traditional thing is submission to Rome, is submission to the Holy Father and the authorities of the church, I feel like there are a lot of traditionalists now, and maybe I'm included in this. I don't know, but I'll have to reflect on that. But like, I think there are a lot of traditionalists that now that Francis has passed and we now have the pontificate of Leo the 14th, that are like really backpedaling. You know, like where did the Benevacantists land? Like so I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to define that term real
Hence.
quick. For those who are unfamiliar, sedevacantist is the particular tradition, not tradition, position, of people who believe that the chair of St. Peter is empty, meaning that we had not had a valid pope in, depending on which group you ask, a while, like a varying degree of time. But they believe that the seat is empty. We have not had a valid pope, and so the church is kind of underground in a way. So that is not in any way congruent with Catholic teaching, but it's a position that some people hold, right? So that's the state of vacantists. Benevacantists were, this is hard to explain. It was a coined terms when Pope Benedict XVI, a pope that the trads liked, because he reinstituted the Latin Mass within parishes and said, yes, whenever the faithful ask for this, the priest is obliged to give it to them. And we were like, oh, score, this is great. He resigned from the papacy, something that a lot of people didn't realize he could do. He was not the first to do it, but a lot of people were like, wait, the Pope can resign? I thought he had to die.
Really?
And
It's been a couple hundred years.
yeah. And so he resigns, and Francis becomes Pope. And after the first few months of excitement of, oh, we have a Pope, yay, people start going, but he's saying some things, he's doing some things, and he's not doing some other things, and we start to realize, like, it starts to feel like, oh, this isn't our guy, like he's not playing for our team, so to speak, like not for our particular subsect, right? And so a lot of people took the position that, well, I think that Benedict, not a lot of people, very few people, but like, this is a real niche position.
Yeah.
But people said, oh, I am still Catholic. I'm still in communion with the Pope because I believe that Benedict is still the Pope. He didn't officially resign. And why do we say that? Because, well, his particular wording in his resignation was a little bit off. There's nothing within any of the church traditions that says this is how a pope must resign. It just has to be understood by the church, and it has to become manifest, and those were both clearly true. Like, how do we know that he is not the pope? Because Benedict himself would say, no, I'm not the pope. Like, he is. So,
Yeah.
so it was this particular tradition that lasted for like a hot 12 years, where people were saying, oh, I think Benedict's the real pope. And he's just like working behind the scenes right now, and this will all come to fruition eventually. And then Benedict dies. Oh, I guess we're sedevacantists now. There's just no pope. There was one particular subgroup that do you want
Subgroup of a subgroup.
Yeah, do you want to tell us about the subgroup? Because you told me about this, and I was like busting a gut laughing at the time.
Yeah, so Pope Benedict dies, and you have these people who up until this point have been claiming, that he was the valid pope, because he didn't officially resign. Then you have a even smaller subgroup. I think this might have been literally like maybe 50
You have to
people.
define conclavists real quick.
Conclavists. So conclavists are people who get together and elect their own pope.
Yeah.
Basically. So sometimes you hear like Pope Michael. Was it Michael Baudin?
Yeah.
Passed away a couple years ago. He was a conclavist pope because his family elected him pope and all this fun stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this group decided to get together and hold a conclave. A group of like 50 people, like conclavists. And at the end of it, they elected Jorge Bergoglio as Pope.
Yeah, as Pope
So
Francis the First.
yeah, so
Which is
they
such
were
a, it's such
officially
a
community
sweet,
again.
like misguided but sweet effort to say like, how can we like fix it?
Yeah,
Okay, well Benedict died. What if we hold our own conclave and say that the current pope is the pope, so that we can all be one big happy family again? Like,
yeah, and I guess it worked for them.
yeah. So yeah, that like, but when you are
Others, I think, just kind of quietly stopped saying that they're beneficantists.
right, but some people had very publicly said it for several years,
Yeah, and suddenly aren't.
right, and just suddenly aren't, and it's that same sort of backpedaling that I think people got this sort of spirit of defiance toward the Pope, because the Pope was just, whether intentionally or inadvertently, causing issues for their particular group, or for their particular spirituality, or for their particular expression of faith. And so there's this feeling of like necessary defiance against the Pope. And then Pope Francis dies, and we have a new Pope. Well, if we keep acting like that, then this Pope isn't going to like us either. You know? Because we're going to be the troublemakers. But if we don't speak up, then he won't know what we want as faithful. And so I don't know what to do here. And so like I feel like there's been this sort of awkward backpedaling of like, we haven't really felt out this Pope yet, other than what his brothers keep saying about him. His brothers need to stop talking to the press. I never thought we'd reach the point, because we had the point with Francis where it's like, I like Pope Francis, I just wish he'd stop talking to the press on planes. And now it's like I like Pope Leo, I just really wish his brother in Florida would stop speaking to the press everywhere. So like, I never thought we'd get to that point, but that's where we are. Like I want the Pope's brothers to stop giving interviews.
I mean, just the fact that we have a Pope whose brother's in Florida.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that's such a funny thing. It's like, all right, we have a Pope whose brother is definitely strapped. Like he's definitely like carrying a gun in case a gator comes up, and like we have a Pope whose brother is definitely walking some people who are definitely on bath salts right now. Like it's Florida's a weird place. All right, I'm from Florida. I can say that. But in any case, so it's like, we don't know much about Leo. What do we as traditionalists now do? Because we want to make our voice heard of please, Holy Father, like, would you please give us these permissions back? We also don't want to nag and cause more problems for ourselves. You know, because we don't know where he lands on a lot of things. And so we see a lot of people trying to paint him as their Pope, which we did with Francis as well. It's like he had his first official meeting with Cardinal Burke. This could mean a lot. Or it could just mean that he's talking to Cardinal Burke.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know. Like, they're just,
Cardinal Burke's a
they're
cool
brother
guy.
bishops.
I'd like
They
to
do
talk to him.
that. Yeah. And so it's like this could be, like, you see a lot of things, like, every little thing is this could mean a lot for the Latin Mass community. Yeah, could. Or could mean nothing. We don't know. In the same way that Francis, it would be like every little thing he would do, this could mean a lot from a total departure of the church from the true faith. Or it could mean nothing. You know?
Right.
But, you know, personally, when I'm blessed that, most churches at this point, that, like, most parishes that were hosting a Latin Mass, like most diocesan parishes that were hosting a Latin Mass, when Traditionis Custodes came out, applied for an extension. Most were granted an extension. And so there are some places within diocesan parishes where you can actually validly attend a Latin Mass now, and that's great. I am blessed to have one not very far from me, and so I'm back in my liturgical home. But there was a time in which I was like, yeah, no, I'm sorry, but you're not going to catch me at a Latin Mass in a parish because the Pope said no. And so what can I do? Well, you and I attended the Ukrainian liturgy for a bit. That's what a lot of people did, was they just said, like, okay, I'll go Byzantine then. We have other traditional liturgies within the church. Is this my immediate home? No, but it's the closest thing to home that I can validly get right now. You know? Mm-hmm. And so I'm just going to dive into this. and that there was a time in which that was like really fashionable, that everybody was checking out the Byzantine liturgy, and it just felt like this cool niche thing that we were all doing.
I mean, it is a cool thing. I
Yeah,
mean, you know.
yeah. They but yeah, we attended this Byzantine liturgy, and that was a really good place for me to spiritually flourish. That being said, I had the advantage of I have a Byzantine liturgy 20 minutes from me. Like other people, I have Father Ted who just wants to be called Ted. Like I want to be like, excuse me, Father Theodore, and he's like, just call me Teddy. It's like, oh no, like,
No,
um,
thank you.
it's like, yeah, we have Father Theodore who, this is a completely fictional guy, by the way. I'm not talking about actual Father Ted. Um, but it's like we have Father Theodore who is regularly preaching heresy, and he has this really banal liturgy, and this really lax way with the rubrics, and just doesn't hold confessions at all. And then we have like I used to live in this one place that had this like schismatic beyond schismatic church, that they called themselves the Alphonsian Redemptorists. Yes, I'm going to call them out by name because it's ridiculous and people should know. Um, that say like they called themselves Alphonsian Redemptorist Traditional Catholics. Well, that sounds very Catholic, you know. If I say, oh, and then we had a Benedictine thurible that we were using for mass, you'd be like, that sounds really Catholic. What's a Benedictine thurible? Nothing. Like it's the Benedictines use thuribles. That's the incenser for anyone who might not be familiar. They have the Benedictines use thuribles. We use thuribles. There's no such thing as a Benedictine
Yeah.
thurible, but an Alphonsian Redemptorist, same thing. Redemptorists are a thing. St. Alphonsus is a thing. So Alphonsian Redemptorists, hot diggity dog. That sounds Catholic. And so, yeah, this parish, it's like, that's like, oh, we're the traditional Catholics, and we are the Alphonsian Redemptorists. And I don't remember exactly where the roots from. I couldn't quite find the information. I think they're branched off of one of the schismatic churches from the Philippines, of which there are several. But
Hmm.
the Philippines is a very interesting case study when it comes to Catholicism. Um, but yeah, they were this parish of people who considered themselves to be traditionalist Catholics. I don't think they had any valid sacraments. I once went to lunch at the local diner with my wife Jess, and we accidentally ran across four of their bishops who were eating there, and it's like, oh well, this is weird, and so like, um, but like,
Surprised they have that many.
right, but like, let's say for instance that parish is like no valid sacraments, but they are regularly trying to preach like actual traditional Catholicism. The best thing that I can do for me and my family is probably to say, all right, we're gonna double dip. Like, the best thing we can say is, all right, we're going to go here because it has the Eucharist, it has actual sacraments, and then we're going to go here for this guy's preaching and connect in some way with traditional Catholicism, even if this is effectively a LARP, you know. And an argument could be made
Yeah.
for, particularly in today's age, you can be a trad very easily because there are so many digital things available on the internet. But it's just not the same thing as being like, okay, I have these things I go to on the internet, but then the thing I actually physically go to with physical people in real life is this. It's like, no, you want something you can sink your teeth into. So if I only had, I was very blessed that our pastor in that town was an amazing pastor, like very holy man, and I love him to death. But but if he were not, if I had a really like irresponsible pastor, yeah, I'd just go there for valid sacraments, and then I'd go over there to talk to people who think like me and are trying to live a spirituality similar to mine. You know, it's like go to one for the sacrament and go to one for the community. You know,
Yeah.
and yeah, I know it's just it's a tricky thing with traditionalism. Tradition is so important, but it's one of those things that there are those constant pitfalls of, am I trying to preserve my expression of the faith at any cost? Does that separate me from Rome? Does that separate me from my bishop? Does that separate me even from just the Catholic laity? Like, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't really know what the answer is here. I wish I could give like some sort of conclusion of it. And that's why we need to blank. But I guess in simplest terms, that's why it's important to say, yeah, you need to subscribe to the traditions of the church and really actually make an effort to know them. I feel like a lot of people don't. Like, what has been handed down to you? Like, this is a rich heritage that we have all the way from Abraham up until today. Everything that has happened in between those is part of our identity as a religion, as a people. So it's important to know those things in the same way that it's important for someone to know, the traditions of their family, to know where their family comes from, to know their family tree. Like, that's significant to a person. It's significant to a church to know who we were and therefore who we are. But to all of my traditionalist brethren, it is worth reflecting, is our traditionalism, which feels good, virtuous, beautiful, it feels like a wonderful thing to be involved in. Presuming that we are the patient and that the devil is screw tape, because we are and he is. That
Mm-hmm.
the devil is always trying to pick at what he can pick at, not what he wants to pick at, It's like, okay, if he can't get you in certain ways by making you just completely abandon the faith and swear off allegiance to Rome and all those things, well, then what can he do? He can just plant seeds. And
Yeah.
and he can make you think, okay, well, the thing that I and the holy people around me are doing is standing firm in defiance. Where does that actually lead? So pray for unity of the church, not just between the Catholics who are in communion with Rome or in a state of canonical irregularity, but communion within the East and West, communion with our Orthodox brethren. I will say probably the most controversial thing I've said on this podcast, and that's probably a bar that is hard to reach, but I think it's important for us to be bold in our intentions as we pray. I was praying a rosary a couple weeks ago with Jess, and during my intentions, I just said, and you know what? I pray for an end to Protestantism. And
Oh.
and that's like a controversial thing to say, because like that sounds like I'm saying I want it to be eradicated and like just like, nuke them, But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I want us to all be one, and therefore
Yeah.
Protestantism actually has to end. Like we need to stop protesting. like
Right.
like you can't be a faction that is defined by its separation from the church and then be part of the church. It's like, yeah, I actually do want an end to Protestantism for the good of all Protestants and for the good of all Catholics, because it's good for us to be one as a church, as Christ and the Father are one,
Yeah.
So, yeah. So pray for unity within the church. Pray for an end to the factioning that happens so frequently within the church. And pray for yourself and reflect on what are the ways in which I am rejecting the traditions handed down to me. What are the ways in which I might be rejecting the magisterium and the way in which they're managing the church? And how can I be more submissive to those things that I hold as an authority of how I ought to live my life and my life with God? So, yeah. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah. I think that's pretty succinct.
All right. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. You know what? Let's do it in Latin, for the trads. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto.
Sic et erat in principio, nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen.
Amen. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Go be holy, everybody.